We're going to go to the National Cemetery here of Gettysburg. This is the cemetery that Abraham Lincoln will dedicate November 19th, 1863. He will read the Gettysburg Address here, 271 words. He actually came here the day before, November 18th, stayed here in town, finished it up, and delivers it here on November 19th, 1863. So what's interesting about this cemetery is it's right beside the private cemetery for the city. And the cemetery caretaker was a woman because her husband was fighting in the Civil War. And so she used this area beside it to help bury all the Union dead. Now, the Confederate dead are buried throughout the battlefield and throughout the city. Like, I was told that sometimes even when they're digging and excavating, sometimes they can find a dead body. So Confederate dead are buried all over, plus they were taken back to their homes and things along that nature. A lot of the Confederate dead are actually buried in Richmond, Virginia, from Gettysburg. There's about 8 Confederates, though, that wound up in this cemetery. I'll show you where Lincoln stood. So we're gonna go in and I'll show you where Abraham Lincoln was. I'm inside Gettysburg National Cemetery. This is the archway here, or the opening here with the 2 eagles. And when you walk in, you can see they have some amazing statues when you first walk in. But this is the opening part. And Cemetery Hill overlooks it. So this is where a big part of the battle was. Look, you can even see, here's the right of the 82nd, probably Ohio Valley Infantry. This is where they stood. So this is people who were fighting. This is before the cemetery was made. There were actually people fighting right here. So Gettysburg, the city, was in the middle of the battle, and I don't think a lot of people realize that all the time. But here's Cemetery Hill right behind me, and then there's the marker for the Gettysburg Address. It's on the street, even though it's going to take place inside the cemetery. The marker is right over there. So as I walk in the cemetery here in Gettysburg, this National Cemetery, you can no longer be buried here unless you're a spouse or a child of someone who is buried here. But they have veterans buried here all the way up until the Gulf War. That is how many veterans are buried here. So everyone from the Mexican-American War to the Gulf War are buried in this cemetery. You get famous people. Nevis, who worked for Eisenhower in World War II, is actually buried here. He was good friends with Eisenhower, liked him so much that he wanted to be buried close to the other heroes of Gettysburg. So here is a marker to Lincoln delivering the Gettysburg Address here in the Gettysburg National Cemetery. This is the famous photograph of, you see people, he's coming down off of the podium. He's in the middle. He doesn't have his top hat on. So you can see they've circled him in the photograph. Oh, it's 272 word, 2-minute speech. A crowd of 20,000 people. So again, November 19th, 1863, 4.5 months after the Battle of Gettysburg. So they, at one time, believed that he actually stood where this monument is. And if you read some older publications, they'll say that he stood where the monument was, but that's not true. There was a flagpole here, and he was looking at the flagpole. He actually was in the private cemetery, the Evergreen Cemetery. This is the private cemetery of the people here in Gettysburg. And the podium was actually over here. He stood over here, and they say he actually was at this mausoleum in the back that you can kind of see with the roof over there. That's where they said Lincoln actually stood. That's where the podium actually was, and that he looked over into this direction of the National Cemetery. So when he delivers the Gettysburg Address, he's actually in the Evergreen Cemetery next door to the Gettysburg National Cemetery. And like I said, this is still an active cemetery. If you're connected to somebody who's already buried here, there are many unknown soldiers buried here. They're marked just by numbers, but it's hallowed ground. Even Lincoln says to like and subscribe to Walk with History. A cool monument that's here in the Gettysburg National Cemetery is friend to a friend, brotherhood undivided. And this is because a lot of these people who fought knew each other, right? They both went to the people would go to West Point together, they studied together, and then they ended up on opposite sides of the fight. So you have all the states here that fought in the Civil War. And this was this depicts an actual event that happened. So Hancock and Addison Armstead were personal friends. And they were on opposite sides, Union and Confederate. And he gets injured, and he's mortally wounded, and Hancock will survive the war. Armstead dies at Gettysburg, and they kind of make amends as he's dying. So this is the hard part of the Civil War. A Civil War is brother against brother. You fighting against people you know, people you love, people you care about, but you have the ideals and are so grounded and so important to you that you're willing to die for something that you believe in. And you'll get many arguments about what people are fighting for in the Civil War. Everybody has some unique individual quality that makes them believe what they believe or what they're holding on to. So this is the friend to friend monument here in Gettysburg National Cemetery. I think it's an important monument to see. And like I said, you have people buried here, Vietnam War vets here, both World Wars, of course, Civil War, and Gulf War. Right. So again, like I had said, this is where they had originally thought Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. But it came to find out fairly recently, very recently too, historians have uncovered that he actually didn't stand here. He actually stood in the other cemetery, but this was where the flagpole was. But it says Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. That's what it says on it. And it has like a woman and a man in uniform. And then a woman on the top holding a cross. So this is actually wrong. See how it says site now marked by the monument. And this is a copy of the Gettysburg Address, but this is actually wrong, right? Because we had said it actually happened over here in the Evergreen Cemetery. And he actually stood right, you can't even really see it, but there's a mausoleum back there under the trees. They think it was generally in that area where he was. My final thoughts as I leave Gettysburg and this area is just how important it is, how amazing it is. This is the turning point of the war, right? So this is the moment where the South has advanced so far up north. They're in Pennsylvania, and this is where the big battle takes place, and the Union prevails. The Union pushes them back. Now this is 1863. War is gonna go on for another 2 years, but at least now the Union is going to have the upper hand and be pushing back. So thank goodness for these heroes. Thank goodness for these men, these ordinary men who find courage within themselves to rise above and to do something great. I always think of Strong Vincent, but I think of the men that followed him, and I just think of the women too, Remember, this cemetery was built and done by a woman. She was like 7 months pregnant when she did this because her husband was fighting in the Civil War. She was taking care of Evergreen Cemetery. So she does Gettysburg National Cemetery. She helps map it out and help get people in and all the logistics. So you have to commend the people of the time. They really were hardy. They really were strong. And I'm thankful to get to remember them and to tell you about them. On to the next Walk with History.